Crystal, are we ready to go
Yes,
live?
go ahead. Yes.
All right then. Well, good evening. We'd like to welcome you to the Zoom Candidates Forum sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties. I'm Sandy Eads, and I live in Kansas City, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters. The League and the right for women to vote are celebrating our first 100 years in 2020, and I'm pleased to say that both are still very relevant and important as we embark on our next 100 years. The League of Women Voters are organized at the state, local, and national levels, and our membership is open to all people of voting age, including men, since 1974. There are over 700 member leagues representing 500,000 members and active supporters, serving millions of voters in every election cycle. We're a nonpartisan organization, and we do not endorse candidates. But we are issue-oriented, and after careful study of issues, and when consensus of our members on issues are reached, advocate at all levels very actively of our government for our positions. The League is well known for voter services activities, taking part in voter registration, as well as candidate debates like this one, and forums while bringing focus to the issues. Our popular site, vote411.org, will give you information about your particular ballot, candidates, and ballot issues, and more. As of yesterday, this site is live, so take time to check out your ballot for your races in your location. In addition to this Zoom event, we are also live streaming this webinar on Facebook. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to our candidates for being responsive to voters. We also want to thank League member Cheryl Barnes for being tonight's moderator, as well as the members of the League's Forums Committee, especially Anitra Steele, for planning and organizing this event. Because of the nonpartisan nature of this event, campaign literature cannot be displayed in any way while we're live on Zoom. We welcome and appreciate the participation of these candidates, and to minimize distraction, we'll turn off viewers' audio and video so we can concentrate on the candidates for Missouri House District 37. We'll have a timer show up on a screen that will give the candidates 90 seconds to give their answers, and that will govern the duration of everyone's speaking. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl now to moderate our forum tonight. Cheryl.
Thanks, Sandy, and welcome everyone, and thanks especially to our candidates. In my screen on the upper left-hand side is Annette Turnbaugh. If you would just all, and David Karam. Did I say that right, David? Or excuse me, Daniel?
Daniel, yes, Daniel.
Daniel Karam.
Yes.
And then John Boyd Jr. So thank you all for participating. We're going to start off, we've got a wide range of questions that League of Women Voters members have sent in. Some of them are a little more personal than others, like first of all, why are you running? And we'll start with Daniel, with you with that one.
Okay, well, let's see. I guess I've been interested in politics for some time. I grew up in the 60s, actually, and there was a lot of protests going on back then. There was a lot of things. There were people being sent, halfway around the world and dying. And so a lot of people were getting upset, a lot of young people. And so I became interested. And you might say I've been interested ever since. Now, there's a lot of things that I don't know and a lot of things that I do know. And I'm just trying to, in a matter of speaking, come up with some answers. Because while there are some problems, I firmly do believe that there are solutions. However, if the solution is not enacted, if it's not taken up, if it's not used, the problems get worse. That's what I see is happening today. The problems are getting worse because the solutions are not being used.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd, why are you running?
Well, I have to say that politics is never anything I thought I'd be involved in. I certainly don't care for politics, but I had a lot of people come to me and tell me how tired they are of ladder climbing politicians who feel like the rules and the laws don't apply to them. They just do whatever they want, but expect us to live by a different set of rules. And so one of the things that's going to set me apart from my two opponents is experience. Not only am I born and raised in this town, I've worked in a union shop. I've had to rely on union wages for food, shelter, and health care. I'm a veteran, so I understand veterans' issues. And I've worked since I left high school and out of the Air Force. I came back home here to Grandview, and I've been working in warehouses and factories, and I've had to do the hard work so I can relate to the people in my community. And they deserve better than the typical politician that we've been stuck with.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, same question. Why are you running?
Well, my life has been of service to Grandview. I've grown up Grandview. My family started a newspaper in 1952, the Jackson County Advocate. I worked there for 26 years, making up all of the politicians' advertising through the years. I graduated from Grandview High School. I've been on the board of aldermen here for the city of Grandview. I just won my 6th term. I am not a politician. I'm a servant of the people. And I continue to do that. Should I win this seat for state representative, 37th district, I will be resigning my seat, and the board and mayor will be replacing me for the final year of my term. I love Grandview. I'm involved heavily and have been my whole life. As a servant, I'm the secretary of the VFW Auxiliary, the president of the Historical Society. I'm a member of the Lions Club and the Grandview Chamber of Commerce. And I've been really involved in the town my entire life.
Thank you. We will start, your questions now will have 90 seconds to respond. And our timer for those of you at home are probably getting an idea of the countdown, and that will keep us all on track so we can move through these fairly quickly. So we will start with you, Ms. Turnbaugh, on this one. And if you're elected, what issues should the legislature have in 2021?
Well, there are several of them. Personally, the excuse me, as was discussed a little while ago, for healthcare, education, jobs and unemployment, all these things need to be reworked in order to fit better for the people. Expansion of Medicaid, of course, the right to work so that everyone is entitled to get jobs. There are so many things right now. With the healthcare aspect, I've been involved with my seniors here in the area, helping and assisting them with Grandview assistance, with the bills and things, yard pickup, things like that. I've always been involved with the seniors. And the issues themselves, there are so many. And again, I'm stumbling here. The jobs and unemployment, of course, the COVID-19. We've got to figure out what's going to happen with COVID-19 because the confusion of the information that's going out right now. Do you take the shot when they get it? Do you wait to take the shot? Why don't we have a mandate across the world here on masks right now? Obviously, it's been proven that not having masks and not having the proper PPE, not only for the citizens of the communities, but for our healthcare workers on the front lines.
Thank you. Thank you. And don't feel like you have to fill the 90 seconds if you are through with your explanation. It's okay to take less time. No worries.
I want to be appropriate.
It's a friendly group here. Mr. Boyd, what issues should the Missouri State Legislature have in 2021?
You know, there are so many. Unfortunately, I can't give them all here in just 90 seconds, but I do want to reiterate when Annette mentioned right to work, I'm definitely against that right to work legislation. Everybody should be having good jobs, and the right to work legislation was voted down by large margins by our state's citizens. And it hurts working class people and labor unions. So that's a dead issue. I don't expect that to be back on that. I think that when it comes to healthcare, you know, we need to not be spending money, say, removing a candidate's signs from the right of way up and down the highway. That's money that could be spent on Missouri citizens' healthcare. Unfortunately, when candidates litter the highway up and down the road with their campaign signs, we have to pay at least 2 workers to go out there with a big truck and clean it up. That's money that needs to be spent on our citizens, not spending our citizens' money cleaning up after our candidates. One of the other things I definitely want to do is put a stop to these ladder climbing politicians. It's a bipartisan issue. Josh Hawley did it, Nicole Galloway's trying to do it, and Annette's trying to do it. We don't need somebody who just got elected in June running for an office in August and November already. We need people to do the job we hired them to do and stop trying to climb a ladder. So I will put forth legislation that will help curb that by requiring them to resign upon announcing running for another office that would start before the end of their current term. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Mr. Karam, what is your perspective on what the Missouri State Legislature should focus on in 2021?
Well, I would say that healthcare is a large, very important item. I want universal healthcare. Now, that might sound like it's not realistic and all this and that, but if we don't move in that direction, it's going to be even more non-realistic. I think we can move in that direction, and I would support and propose things that would move us in that direction. Healthcare, yes. And whether we realize it or not, our democracy is under attack. And who's attacking the democracy? Who stands to benefit from less and less democracy? Well, there's this thing called the 0.01% that has a vast amount of wealth. And they're using their wealth to do all kinds of things like decommission the post office, like get rid of Social Security. I mean, these are big and broad items, but I think they have potency and have to have focus. It has to do with justice, social justice. These are things that I care about and would be concerned about and would be looking for ways to move, shift, to bring about more and better solutions.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. This question will go to first Mr. Boyd, and it's about infrastructure. What is your position on raising the fuel tax to sufficiently fund badly needed road and bridge repairs and replacements? If not fuel taxes, what funding methods do you propose? And of note, the last time the fuel tax was raised was in 1992.
I greatly appreciate this question because that's one of those things I didn't get to answer in the previous section. It is something we definitely need to focus on, not only just in 2021, but every year going forward. We have the 6th most roads, but we're somewhere around 28th when it comes to funding the infrastructure. You know, any tax like that needs to be approved by the people, and overwhelmingly we've shot it down again and again. I believe it was an Amendment D just a few years ago here, and the people shot it down. But the fact is, unfortunately, at some point we're going to have to come to terms with the fact that as much as we hate to raise taxes, we're going to have to in some form. And I think probably the most responsible way to do that would be through a sales tax. Simply raising the gas tax, I don't believe is effective because you're only then charging people that use gasoline. But now we have electric cars and hybrid cars, whereas the usage is still there, but then they wouldn't be paying that tax to help maintain the roads they're using. I'm not a fan of the other idea that has been thrown out often, which is using it as toll roads for like I-70 or I-44. So I believe ultimately a sales tax increase is probably what we're going to end up having to make up the cost for our infrastructure.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, your position on raising the fuel tax to sufficiently fund badly needed roads and bridge repairs and replacements. If not fuel taxes, what funding methods do you propose? The last time that tax was raised was in 1992.
Well, I believe we do need to have somewhat of a fuel tax, but I actually, not that it can be done, but I would like to have some research looking into the fact of having toll roads. You know, we've got all these big trucks that travel across our state, and you can look at the Kansas side where they have the turnpike. And it has paid for keeping, those are beautiful highways over there. Whether it's realistic or not, I would think there would be a way, although, as John's saying, they had shot it down. I think if it's approached in a different manner, I think combined, somewhat of the fuel tax, of course, needs to be raised for the people of the community. But I think that these trucks, the heavy trucks and the travelers that go through our state should be picking up part of the bill on the deal, because they're the ones that are kind of destroying our roads along the way. So I would like to see that there might be a way, whether they call it a turnpike or otherwise. I would like to be involved in a conversation to see how that could be done, because they're destroying the roads for our people of our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Karam, the fuel tax to pay for roads and bridges.
Well, I would not be opposed to a fuel tax. As a matter of fact, the people who use the roads are buying gas, and if they're paying a little bit extra when they buy a gallon of gas, and that goes to repair roads, to build roads, or infrastructure for bridges, then I see a correlation there. Yeah, if people are using these things, then and if they're, especially if they're making money, like the big truckers, and the big truckers with their weight are the ones who contribute the most to the deterioration of roads. I think there could be some kind of a proportion of how these people are using our infrastructure to make profits to pay for these roads. I think it makes sense.
Thank you. We're going to switch gears. We're going to skip around a little bit on topics. What is your position on Amendment 3 on the November ballot? The voters passed a clean amendment 2 years ago, and the legislature went to work, and they brought us back Amendment 3. Would you address that, starting with you, Mr. Karam?
Okay. Yeah, I was looking at this amendment. It says ban gifts from paid lobbyists to legislators and their employees. Reduce legislative campaign contribution limits. That sounds fantastic. It sounds real good. And then I heard that campaign contribution limits have been set at $5. Now, this was wrote by the legislature, and the idea of changing the I can't even say it right, redistricting process voters approved in 2018. I don't like the idea of changing what the voters approved. This looks like something that the legislature came up with to undo what the voters passed. I'd like to see what the voters passed to be enacted and given a chance to work. I think what was that amendment was a good thing. And I think the way this is wrote, it leads people to think that this is a good thing. But it has to do with words, ideas, concepts, and in my estimation, misleading the public.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh?
Yeah, definitely. I am supporting a no on Amendment 3. Mr. Karim was not incorrect in what has happened. This was passed. Those first two, the banning the gifts and the reducing the legislative campaign contributions, were part of Amendment 3 in 2018 that over 69%, I believe, of the voters approved. What they've done is they're hoping I feel that it's a bait and switch, because those two things have already happened. And so their hope is that the voter only reads those first two sentences and says, yes, we want them to ban gifts. Yes, we want them to reduce the legislative campaign contributions. But the truth of the matter is, and I'll just quote and read it here, they want to change the redistricting process voters approved in 2019. Stop. Transferring the responsibility for drawing state legislative districts from the nonpartisan demographer to governor appointed bipartisan commissions, modifying and rendering the redistricting criteria. That's a no-no. We don't need the governor to be appointing people of their own to do this. It's fine the way it is. I think it's stellar that we have nonpartisan state demographers that are doing this. It's going to be fair across the board when they do that. So
Thank
a
you.
no on Amendment 3 for me.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd, Amendment 3.
Well, it's another loaded question here, and I wish I had about 5 minutes at least to go over it. So the thing is, you can't argue that the way this is packaged is horrible, but then give praises to the way Clean Missouri was packaged 2 years ago. They are pretty much packaged exactly the same. And the problem with either one is that it takes on too many subjects in one referendum or ballot issue. These things are supposed to be separated out according to the Constitution of Missouri, one issue per piece of legislation or ballot initiative. It didn't go far enough last time to limit lobbyist gifts to 0. This one does that. I disagree with the changing of campaign contributions. A $100 change 2 years ago didn't make a difference ethically, just like it's not going to make a difference this time. However, the governor doesn't get to appoint his friends to a bipartisan board. If you understand what the term bipartisan means, it means it's from both parties, being both the Democrat and the Republican parties. And it still takes a large majority, which means either side has to convince the other in the drawing of the districts, or it goes before a panel of judges. That's better than what they're calling a nonpartisan demographer, because that person is handpicked by a partisan auditor. That auditor is Democrat now, but would they be happy with that process if that auditor was a Republican? I say no. And for that reason, I don't like that process, and it's not fair to the people to be stuck with a single person picked by a partisan auditor. I'm yes for Amendment 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, and we'll start with you, Mr. Boyd. How do you feel about employment protections for LGBTQ Missourians?
I think we need employment protections for all people, and it needs to be applied equally. I think that we have the laws in place that if there's discrimination based on their sexual preference, then those laws are in place to protect them now. If there's things that are happening, there's processes for that, for them to seek, justice, through the court systems. But those things are in place for people of all people of all kinds, creeds, ages, races, and sexual orientation. It is already illegal to discriminate based on those things.
Thank you. Mr. Karam, your position on employment protections for LGBTQ Missourians.
Okay, well, that brings up the idea of rights. Do we have rights? Are the rights being upheld? And in a manner of speaking, as governors, it is the government's job to make sure that rights are protected. And is the government doing its job? Well, that I think could be in question. Now, anybody, should have rights for labor, for work. And I think there's a lot of questions that are involved with this issue, and that they can be brought under the light. And if it has to be in a court setting, so it can be in a court setting. But I really do believe that people do have rights, and that is what is at issue with LGBTQ, or somebody who's poor, or somebody who is Black. We all have rights, and it is the job of government to make sure that our rights are respected.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, employment protections for LGBTQ Missourians?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Plus, LGBTQ plus has been struggling for a really long time. I'm very happy to see where things have gone for them, but the discrimination still there. But absolutely, they need the protections under the law going forward and beyond. because it's still out there. But you know, as Daniel had mentioned, we're all humans, we're all people. We need to be able to protect everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you?
No, I said that, you know, bottom line, we need to protect everyone, and the LGBTQ community is one that has been, you know, attacked most lately. And yeah, they need to be protected. Absolutely need to be protected.
Thank you. Next question, and we will start with you, Ms. Turnbaugh. What is your viewpoint on tuition, scholarships, and vouchers for private, religious, and/or secular schools with donors receiving tax credits or deductions?
No. They have the private schools and with the vouchers and all. It's not fair to those going to public schools, and the private schools have it set in a fashion in which they don't need those vouchers for the kids to go to private schools. We need all of our money going towards education for the kids in public schools in order for them to be able to have every dollar possible to get their education. The private school kids are it's a parent's choice, and I don't believe they need vouchers in order to do it. If they're going to send the kids to private schools, obviously they can afford to do so. And I want to see those dollars spent in the public school system.
Thank you. Mr. Karam, your viewpoint on tuition, scholarships, and vouchers for private, religious, and/or secular schools with donors receiving tax credits or deductions?
Well, I think that everybody has a right to send their child to whatever school they choose. If they choose to send their child to a private school, well then I believe they have to pay for it. As far as giving some thought to this general subject, I have a question about how in certain districts, the kids, their schooling is limited, whereas in other districts, the kids go to, like high school kids go to almost like universities. I mean, I think that the thing about funding public schools should have to do with the whole state, and all the schools ought to be funded appropriately. And this has to do with privatizing education, and there is this privatizing in our economic system that is growing, and it wants to eliminate all these public, in my estimation, all these public benefits that people are entitled to, with the post office, with the schools, with many, many things, Social Security.
Thank you. And Mr. Boyd?
So this is another one of those things that sets me apart from my political opponents here. You know, it's a very popular idea for conservatives and Republicans for these vouchers for charter schools and things like that. But just like I stand with my brothers and sisters in the union, which is not typical of a Republican, I stand with our superintendents and our educators in supporting our public school systems. You can't take money out of that system. It's like pulling bricks out of a wall and expecting it to stand there still. And so, whereas I understand that people want the best for their children, I mean, these are things that we all can come together on, as we all want to be able to have a good quality education for our kids. We need security, we need jobs. And so we have to be able to fund that public education so that all of our children in the community can go and receive a quality education. So I think it's important to support that and not rob Peter to pay Paul, or pull away from those funds when we so badly need them.
Thank you. While we're on the topic of money, I did a little research, and it shows that there's about 15% of the population in Grandview lives in poverty, and the same for Kansas City. And if we just did some extrapolation and said 15% of the population of Missouri lives in poverty, giving us a little wiggle room, what would you do to resolve that issue? How would you help get people out of poverty? And we'll start with you, Mr. Karam.
Well, this, I was just thinking today, Jesus once said, I'm a Christian. He said that the poor shall always be among you. And so I gave that some thought and I thought, wow, what is that? And the idea that that is a good thing, it occurred to me that the idea that with people with all this wealth, you know, they have a continuous opportunity to do good to others. And that, in a manner of speaking, that's never going to end. That's never going to be taken away. That there will always be an opportunity to do some good with whatever extra or affluence, wealth, power someone might have. And then at a certain point, we'll all have to answer as to how we did. I ran for state house in Michigan once, and I had as my slogan, "War against greed." And I could talk more about that, but maybe later.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boyd, how would you work on reducing the amount of poverty in the state?
Well, a lot of it starts with first understanding how did people get there in the first place. I'm out there in the community and I talk with people. I can only speak, locally to the ones that I've talked to in Grandview, and a lot of them, especially the ones that are homeless, some of them, they just don't even want to be helped. They're completely content the way they are because they can go down on the corner out here across the highway and make $200, $300 a day and not pay taxes on it. Now, there's a lot of others, though, that need help and could use the help. And there's lots of things we can do, one, for them, but also to curb that going forward. There's a lot of kids coming out of high school that instead of being forced into a college education that they don't want or aren't prepped for, they can learn trades. We need to start dedicating some more money to helping kids that want to learn trades out of high school. That's why unions are a great thing. They bring in people, they teach them the trade, they give them the skills they need, and they put them to work. And with that, they also provide a good health care benefit. And that's another thing. A lot of people that I've talked to who are destitute, a lot of times they have to decide if they're going to buy their medicine or pay their light bill or pay their rent or have running water. And the way to get out of that is to help people get those good, decent paying jobs with skills that they can learn. And it's not always skilled trades and things. Sometimes it's clerical and things, but we just need to be able to help people to be able to help support themselves.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, alleviate poverty in Missouri.
Well, again, I'm going to speak just to Grandview since I've been very involved, especially, well, in my entire life, but especially the last 11 years as an alderman. And to that point, we have some resources for some of these folks. As John mentioned, there are those that don't want the help. We have Grandview Assistance Program. I have set up several of my seniors, a couple of younger families that have younger children that just don't make enough money in order to be able to feed the kids. GAP has been fabulous. This year alone, we've helped to this point over 1,000 families monthly with utility bills, with rent, as well as with food. We have, we have a number of folks in town that have mental issues, drug issues. Our police department has, been for the last 2 years now, has a campaign of Move Towards the Badge, so that some of these folks can come for help. And it's not a trouble situation. I'm hoping that for the state of Missouri, we can find something, again, that in a larger scale of which the communities are doing, Hickman Mills and what we do in Grandview as far as the Grandview Assistance Program. Hickman Mills does have one as well. Food pantries. With what's going on with COVID right now, between folks losing their jobs or with the unemployment they're getting, that's not enough to feed the families and pay all the bills as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. No worries. We're going to change the subject here, and we will start with you, Ms. Turnbaugh. Do you support or oppose modernizing voting access through mail-in ballots, same-day registration, early voting, no excuse absentee voting, or other measures that safely are safely and successfully employed in other states?
Absolutely. Again, with COVID right now, particularly, I heard the other day 1.4 million people have sent in either mail-in votes, mail-in applications, absentee applications. I think it's very safe, and especially at this point in time in our lives with COVID, it's been a miracle for a lot of people. They can't get out amongst others, so I absolutely support it. And I wish they didn't have to have an excuse for or a reason for a mail-in ballot, you know, to have it notarized and everything else. If they want to mail it in, get your copy off their websites and send in the application, get your ballot back and send it right back in. I absolutely am all for it.
Thank you. Mr. Karam, modernizing the voting process in Missouri, making it easier for people to vote.
Well, you know, I have one of these things. It's called a debit credit card. And there's not too many errors that happen with these debit and credit cards. It happens, but not on a regular basis. Now, I don't see why our election process, our democratic process, cannot be certified. I think that our democracy, the idea of democracy, is under attack. And who's to benefit from it? It's that very small percentage of people who have the greatest amount of wealth. I think that all this stuff that's being thrown onto the idea of mail-in voting is directly due to cast doubt on democracy. And I am upset about it. Yeah. And, you know, I think that we can do things through the voting booth. And as a matter of fact, going through the voting booth is a way to avoid violence. I mean, we got some pretty heavy things that are coming down, and we haven't even talked about the environment, but that's, you know, it could get to the point where we don't have a choice. And so I'm all for streamlining the ability for people to vote.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd?
I think the answer is obviously yes. We do need to modernize our voting and allow some more options for people, not just in this time of COVID-19, but going forward through any election. I agree with early voting. I agree with being able to go in absentee. But the key there is you're still going in person. It's a secure vote. I do not agree with mail-in voting. I wouldn't want that on a massive scale. I can't imagine anybody that's ever sent anything through the mail and never had anything get lost. I certainly wouldn't, even if it's just one, I wouldn't want it to be my vote that gets lost. I wouldn't want anybody else to lose their vote either because something happened. And this isn't just malicious activity and purposeful, you know, electioneering and fraud kind of thing. And mistakes happen, accidents happen. I mean, the mail is a pretty good system, but it's not perfect. However, you know, when you go into the gym of the church or the school or wherever your voting place is, and you get your paper ballot and you mark it and put it in the machine, you know you voted and your vote counted. And that's important. I always tell people, you know what? Yes, I want you to vote for me, but it's more important that you just get out and vote. Even if you don't agree with me, even if you're going to vote for somebody else, get out and make your vote count. You got to be able to count it, and you can't necessarily count on mail-in voting.
Thank you. We will start with you, Mr. Boyd, with this question. Do you support or oppose the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and why?
So that's one I definitely would have to study some more on to see exactly, you know, what all is included in the latest version. I've seen different versions over the years. They've been modified slightly. But in general, I would say I'm against it. I haven't read up on it here lately. I know there's a group that sends that out there and asks on surveys and things, but I'd have to say, you know, if there's specific questions about it, I'd be happy to answer. But at present time, I'm not as familiar with it as I had been, say, 2 years ago when I studied up on it.
Thank you. Mr. Karam? Equal
Well,
Rights Amendment?
The Equal Rights Amendment, way long overdue. I mean, how long did it take for women to get the right to vote? Now that the question is, do they have the right to equal pay for equal work? I mean, it's just, how can I put it? There's some kind of wickedness in the system, and that's what we are to struggle against. And what is that? As I define it, it's gaining from other people's loss and other people's suffering. And that is, I think the Equal Rights Amendment is a thing that would be a good step in the right direction towards what I consider to be righteousness.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, ERA, perhaps you can quote it for us?
I can't quote it off the top of my head. The easy answer is absolutely. The equal rights for everyone. And of course, as far as the women go, we're 100 years strong now. We need to continue to move forward and absolutely equal rights for everyone.
Thank you. We are blazing right through these questions.
Well,
Okay, we were good.
90 seconds.
We're going to start with you, Mr. Karam, with this question. And do you favor subsidies for clean power, such as home solar and electric vehicles? Why or why not?
Well, so I have some experience in this area, and I'm very interested in alternative energy. And part of the way it's set up is that if you put solar panels on individual residents and turn the meter, it's called net metering, and so that you are supplying energy in a hot sunny day for the rest of the consumers community, you're not paid what the electric company is paid. I think that you should be paid equal to what you are producing. And as you are using more energy at night or a storm or something, you pay that amount. Yeah, I think there should be subsidies. And I think that energy from the sun is the future. Very importantly so, the future. And that we should look for it more and more and put our best minds at helping with that.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd, do you favor subsidies for clean power, such as home solar and electric vehicles? Why or why not?
Can you clarify that specifically? Subsidies for the homeowners, the consumer, or for the businesses and the corporations?
I think my impression is that it would be like in the tax code. If you put solar panels on your home, you might get a tax credit like they had before, and I think those expired.
Sure, and I know we do have some that still go to the end of the year, and if people want to do that, I think that's great. It's a responsible thing to do, to want to use clean energy and try to use things like solar and wind, to create the energy. But I'm not a fan of subsidies in general, because it's just another way that the government's trying to pick winners and losers in business. People, if we had a more plain and fair tax code, we wouldn't need such subsidies and tax credits and things. So I think that's kind of where the problem begins. But in general, no, I would not be for subsidies.
Ms. Turnbaugh?
Actually, as a real estate agent, I've had more than one of my clients that actually had solar panels on their homes. And their explanation to me was their electric bills were running about $4 and some odd cents because of how much the energy companies were receiving from the use of them. And my understanding, the way they told me, was what they don't use, the electric company takes and uses, and then they get reimbursed basically by the lower bills of what they didn't use. So call it a subsidy, call it a reimbursement. Clean energy is, we just have to have. And it's more and more. I just have some constituents that here in the last 3 weeks actually just put solar panels on their house. They had to take a big old 100-year-old tree down to do it. But I think for all of it, anybody that's willing to step up into this 21st century moving forward with whatever we can do for clean air. Some folks can't afford the electric cars. Some folks can't afford the solar panels, but I congratulate and I appreciate those that do, because we're on our way to cleaner Missouri.
Thank you. A little bit of a change of pace here with this question. The legislature is concerned about protecting the life of the unborn child, since women do not get pregnant by immaculate conception. Would you support bills that would focus on controlling the male role in the creation of that unwanted pregnancy, such as reducing or eliminating insurance payment for Viagra and such medications, requiring support for the mother during pregnancy, and requiring child support after it is born? And we will start with you, Ms. Turnbaugh.
I am for choice. I believe every woman should be allowed to make her own decisions for her health. And it's outrageous for anyone to think they're entitled to legislate a woman's body, for starters. Planned Parenthood is out there and they help women through a lot of services like pregnancy testing, STD, cancer screening, birth control, and general health, as well as men. You can get free birth control. And I'm getting, no, I don't like abortions, but there are times that the situation under which a woman may get pregnant is between her and her God and her doctor. I don't believe that anybody has the right to tell a woman what to do with her body.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd?
So it's obviously a very emotional and loaded topic for a lot of people, and I respect that. My point of view is that all life is sacred, and that begins at conception. We put forward some very good legislation here in Missouri in the last few years. It's built with case law to withstand challenges, and it will protect life. I don't think anybody can say that they're for women or anybody and then advocate for the right for people to terminate them before they even fully get to live life. And so I would say it all goes back to personal responsibility. I know in this day and age that the word abstinence is a bad word, like it's not possible, but it absolutely is possible. Whether men or women, we shouldn't be procreating if we're not prepared to care for another life. And that's just a matter of fact. When you talk about specific things like Viagra and such, those are things that, Viagra, if I remember correctly, was actually originally created to help with blood pressure issues. It wasn't originally intended, for people that wanted to engage in sexual intercourse. So I don't think that's the way to go about it, but absolutely, moms absolutely should be supported by the father of the baby from conception all the way through that child's life till they're an adult.
Thank you. Mr. Karam?
Okay.
The male role in the process.
Pardon? Okay. Well,
We're talking about the male's participation in unwanted, perhaps, pregnancies.
Well, I think we all ought to be responsible for what we do, for our actions. And if a man is responsible for bringing another life into the world, then he should share responsibility for that. Now, the subject is something that I focused on before, and the idea that, the idea of sacredness is important to me and to a lot of people. However, we are not a religious government, and I think that's important, and that what is sacred to one person should not be imposed onto another person. I do not advocate general abortion. Go out and have fun and be, in a manner of speaking, irresponsible, and then just have an abortion to avoid responsibilities. No, that's not what I think personally as a good idea. But the thing is if you're against abortion, then don't do it. But the idea of imposing that on others is not a good thing. And I could talk more about that later.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to change the pace a little bit here with a different type of question. There is training for police departments called crisis intervention training, so that when they respond to a call, they have a sense about what they might do in terms of dealing with a mental health crisis. What would you think about supporting something like for the entire state? And we'll start with you, Mr. Boyd.
Well, I've talked with, our district actually encompasses 4 different municipalities, and I've talked with 2 different police chiefs. And mental health is a very serious concern. They have only so much training as police officers and peace officers to deal with such things. So we really need to focus not just in general training on how to deal with those things, but we need to focus more in the area of healthcare for mental health. Several places the hospitals have been shut down. People have been just turned out onto the streets up in St. Joseph. I was there 2 years ago, and they were talking about the number of people that are homeless, wandering aimlessly on the streets with mental health conditions, and it's a concern for the community. So we need to be able to do more to help support people with mental health conditions so that it doesn't get to the point of crisis. And we need to support officers with that training, as well as anyone else that would find themselves in that situation, so that we don't have such tragic endings as we have had, and obviously has been in the news quite a bit lately, and especially even here in Grandview. So yeah, I think we definitely need to have that training, and we need to do more in the area of mental health to support people with the need mental health care.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, crisis intervention training for statewide for police departments?
Absolutely. In Grandview, we have these training for our police departments. It's scary out there. We do have a lot of folks in town that do have some mental issues. I will feel our police department, with the training that they're receiving and continue to receive, it's ongoing. It's constant training that our guys go through. And it is a huge issue. We have, like I said, we have a lot of folks with mental issues as well as drug problems. And it's very scary for those guys to go out. Oops, sorry guys, there's the cat, told you. But I think the ongoing and across the state needs to absolutely step up. We want our police officers safe, as well as finding places for some of the folks that have some mental illness in town that need some guidance. I know personally for a fact on more than one occasion of some of the folks that we have in town that have those issues, where the police have made buddies with them, for lack of a better term. And they take them in and they let them, they put them up for the 72 hours that they're available to go get them help, to get them on the meds if they've just gone off of their meds. They do everything that they can to try to help those. And I would absolutely love to see, and I'm not saying that they don't already, but I would like to see more police departments across the state absolutely have as much training as they possibly need, because it can be dangerous.
Thank you. Mr. Karam?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about defunding the police departments. Well, actually, I think what a lot of the intention has to do with refunding, that so much of a percentage of a municipality goes into law enforcement. The idea has to do with taking some of those allocated funds and putting them into social service, like social workers, that when a certain incident comes up, that the social worker would be called on I suppose in some ways this already happens, but the idea of it happening more so to eliminate a lot of these problems, a lot of this conflict that ends in violence. It doesn't have to happen. Um, so I would be in favor of reallocating funds. And another thing, as when I was younger, the idea that a police officer, a police department is held to a higher standard. Whatever happened to that? I haven't heard of that, but I really do believe in it, and I think it's important.
Thank you. This question will go back to you, Mr. Karam. Would you support legislative action to return control of Kansas City's police department to Kansas City? Why or why not?
Well, I can't really speak on this. I can speak on it on a personal level, which, I haven't had many problems with Kansas City Police. Therefore, why should I want any change? However, if I was in a position of having influence in this area, I would have to study it. I would have to do research. I would have to see data. I would have to find out what is involved, like, before, after, before, during, after. This is the way it is now. This is the way it can be. These would be different things that would come into making such a decision. And I would give it an effort. I would give it an effort to make a good decision in this regard.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd?
I think that's something that we definitely need to consider, but there are a lot of things to consider, like why was the police department put under the state control in the first place? Have these problems been resolved? Are there things in place that would prevent these problems from happening in the future? But in general, I am always a fan of having more local control. Control should be, with the state, not the federal government, and many things. Same thing with counties and cities. They should be more locally controlled. So I'm a fan of having the Kansas City Police Department control turned back to the city. But I think we definitely need to make sure there's measures in place to make sure that they're compliant in ways they need to be, because it was the same way with St. Louis not too long ago. And then they were able to do that there and not any longer be under the state control. And in fact, they just also are working on the possibility of not having the residency requirements. So it makes a difference to have control more locally, where people are more engaged in this area. So yes, I think we definitely need to look at that possibility.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh?
Yeah, I would really like to see the control locally. It's a little crazy in Kansas City right now. I don't spend a lot of time in Kansas City, but of course the news keeps us apprised of what else is going on there. In the end, absolutely, I would rather see the jurisdictions taking care of their own. But if they wind up in situations where between the mayor overseeing the police department, they can't, then if indeed the state needs to step in, obviously that's going to happen. But my preference would be to see it handled locally with the Kansas City and any of the others, but especially the Kansas City Police Department at this time with all that's going on. But I do like to see it handled locally. They know their people and their community. Thanks.
Thank you. The Missouri Constitution contains separation of church and state. This affects which issues in your mind? And we'll start with you, Ms. Turnbaugh.
Church and state. Well, the old newspaper business said those are the two things you never discuss with anybody, politics and religion. The difference, yes, the separation of church and state. We've got a lot of church organizations. I think they need to stick more with the people of their community and doing what they do best. Obviously, the state is going to oversee, help with what they need as far as, the churches being a nonprofit organization. But I think the separation needs to stay there because politics and religion, the two should not meet in a political stance due to the fact that the issues on the government level need to remain that. We don't need to bring religion other than the obvious integrity and those type of things. But I don't think that everything should be weighing on what religious group you choose to be with. That's your choice. But again, they need to stay separate, in my opinion.
Mr. Karam?
Well, it's a big issue, and the one thing that really has bothered me has been this idea of, you might say, churches saying, okay, this candidate is against abortion, therefore vote for this candidate. I think that's been an issue that's been used time and time again, over and over and over again, and hammered and hammered and hammered, and that it's been misused. It's been abused to get people's votes. A lot of people of faith have voted on that one issue, regardless of people's rights, of protecting people's rights and bring about equity into our society and community. That's a personal thing that I see, and I don't think it's just personal. I think it's pretty much obvious to a lot of people. Maybe some people don't see that, but that's one thing that I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Boyd, separation of church and state?
It's a term that a lot of people like to throw around, and it's not specifically mentioned in our federal constitution. I think it's important to understand the history of why people want a separation of church and state. It means that they don't want an actual church organization entity to control the government like had happened hundreds of years ago in Europe. It doesn't mean that we can't legislate with our faith in mind. For a lot of people, our faith is our moral compass. It's where we go for refuge, where we draw our strength from. And anywhere you look in our Constitution in the state or at the federal level for our country, there's reverence given to our Creator. Our rights are endowed by our Creator and protected through the Constitution. So it's absolutely important for us to be able to exercise our faith and our judgment, but that doesn't mean that we can't be people of faith while legislating.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Mr. Boyd. If you're elected, what will your top 3 priorities be?
Well, one of the 3 priorities that I have, obviously, we need to work on that infrastructure. We touched on that one earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about that again. We're going to have to work on how we're going to fund the Medicaid expansion that we just voted for. That was passed, but in that legislation, in that referendum, initial petition there's no funding mechanism. The problem is you have to rob Peter to pay Paul in this circumstance because you're adding an expense without greater income. So things like education are going to hurt. Infrastructure could hurt too because we have to fund it. It's now part of our laws and our Constitution. So, with the Medicaid expansion, we're going to have to figure out how to fund that. That's really important. One of the other things that I want to do, I touched on earlier, is we need to stop these self-serving ladder climbing career politicians. If somebody wants to run for another office, I think that's their right. I wouldn't even try to stop them. However, you shouldn't be elected in June and then turn around and run for another office in August. That's just ludicrous. Nobody I've talked to, except for the people that do it, have ever said that's a great idea. And so, whereas other people that are doing it might not agree with that, most everybody else in the community agrees we need to put a stop to that. And the best way to do that is to put forward legislation that requires them to resign their position if they choose to seek another office before their current term would end. And just like Annette said earlier, if she wins this race, she'll have to resign the seat she just got in June. And the people deserve better, and that's me.
Thank you. Mr. Karam, your top 3 priorities if you're elected?
Okay, well, I mentioned healthcare earlier. That's a primary objective. How we get there, that would take work, and I'm willing to do work. Another idea that it goes, there's 2 things that go hand in hand. One is this idea of democracy and business. Now, in our system, we have a very small group of people who are making decisions and making orders for a large groups of people to follow. It's called a board of directors, 10, 12 people making decisions that, thousands of people have to follow. I'd like to see more democracy in business, if you want to call it that. And you call it socialism? Well, oh, Venezuela, they got tyranny over there. Well, Stalin was not a communist. He was a criminal. And people get all this stuff confused. So democracy is a very important thing to me. And it kind of goes to this idea of economic equality. What is that? Good question. It's something that we ought to think about, talk about. It's against plutocracy, of, by, and for the rich. Can we have something different? Like people.
Thank you. Ms. Turnbaugh, if you're elected, what will your 3 top priorities be?
Healthcare, education, jobs, and unemployment. In my mind, those are the 3 most important right off the top to get started with. Expanding the Medicaid. Everyone deserves quality health care. Jobs and unemployment. With the issues facing Missouri families, the government can't ignore the unemployment rate. We've got to figure out how to generate more jobs. And of course, with education, teachers have been supporting their own classrooms. They're underpaid, they're overworked, and they spend money out of their own pockets in order for their kids in their classrooms to have what they need. They need better pay, and they need to have to be digging in their own pockets in order to supply those classrooms. We need to find the money in order for them to be able to do that. And as to John's point of ladder climbing politicians, again, I will just reiterate, I am not a politician. I am a servant of the people. I ran for my alderman seat as per the request of my people, as did Alderman Runyons, and filed and didn't run for my campaign for alderman, of course, got postponed to June. The campaign for state representative started in July. So I wasn't running for 2 offices at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's now, we've blazed through the questions, and it's about time for us to wrap up. So you'll each have 2 minutes for closing statements. Mr. Karam, we'll start with you. And if you could just tell us anything you would like for us to know that we might not have covered, or leave us with some parting thoughts about your candidacy, we'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank you. I think you did I liked your job. And I also thank the League of Women's Voters. I've interacted with them in the past, and I've had good rapport with them, and I'm grateful. A future to believe in. I am an American socialist. There's a lot of fear, a lot of ignorance, a lot being cast onto that. Now, why? And I'm talking about the Netherlands, where they vote in their CEO of the oil industry. His salary is set. He's not making millions in stock options. And, I see all this stuff that's happening. And I just kind of wonder why or who is gaining from this? And there's this idea that $400 trillion has been taken from the middle and lower class for the upper class since the 1970s. the wages have not been increasing. The people have been working better, harder, with better technology, producing more, but not getting more. That more has been going to this, well, I'll call them the 0.01% of the population. Can we continue? Well, you know, there's a reason why people steal. There's a reason why people lie. There's a reason why people cheat, because they get something for it. But in the long run, it comes back to them. And we've got to come up with something better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boyd, your last thoughts for us in 2 minutes? Anything we didn't cover you would like to share?
I'd just like to revisit on the EPA. I mean, I think it goes without saying, obviously there needs to be equality. Have it same work, same positions. Yes, the pay needs to be the same. The benefits need to be the same. Equity is a whole different conversation. Coming back to some of the things that were said, you know, by definition, if you hold a political office, if you run for political office, you are a politician, whether you want to accept that label or not. That's just a definition of the word. And as far as not running for two different offices, you had to file for alderman in December. You had to file for state rep in February. The elections were in June and August. You were absolutely running for two different offices at the same time. Let's be truthful, because the people are tired of politicians that say one thing and do another. They're tired of being lied to, and they're tired of people that act like the rules don't apply to them. So when you put your signs out 35 days before the election, and our statutes and our ordinances say you can't put them out before 30, don't say you follow the rules. Just admit you're not following the rules. You know, you can't cost the city thousands of dollars for coming out and collecting stray cats that you feed and not pay for that and expect that you're wasting people's tax dollars, that you're actually serving the people. You're not. That's money that could have been spent over on parks. It could have been spent on any number of things in the city, but instead we're spending money collecting cats that you're feeding and cultivating there. You know, and while we're at it, let's not act like there's not an investigation going on for illegal contributions. It very much is. And the people deserve better. They need somebody who works hard, who can relate to their life experiences, who is willing to stand up against their own political party for the good of our community, not for the betterment of the political party you represent. They don't need a rubber stamp and a chair decorator. They need someone who's going to fight, someone who's going to be honest. And unfortunately, Annette, you just leave them wondering whether you're corrupt or incompetent. Either one doesn't matter. We don't need that to represent us. People deserve better. Vote for me, John D. Boyd Jr.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Turnbaugh, your last closing thoughts for us as we wrap up for the evening?
Sure. Well, for starters, thank you all for having this forum for us. I'm not quite sure what Mr. Boyd is talking about. I do not lie. I am of integrity. If that's the best you got, John, bring it on. But again, back to my point of being here, I'm proud to be running my campaign for state rep to continue serving the area and the people in it down in Jeff City. You can check out my website at Annette4, not the number 4, but the word FOR, mo.com. You know, may the best person win this election going forward in Jeff City. Again, I was hand chosen by State Representative Joe Rankin to fill his seat as he is terming out. And there is nothing about me that is corrupt, nor will there ever be anything about me that's corrupt. I can't, you know, if I'm stepping on toes, hurting feelings, and they got to come up with inappropriate and incorrect information, there's nothing I can do about it but speak to the people of the community and my voters out there and let them know I am here to work for them. If the title wants to be a politician, then so be it. I feel that I'm a servant of the people, and that's what I've done my entire life. That's what I continue to do, hopefully when I get to Jeff City.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all for participating. This is a wonderful opportunity for us all to get to know you in a quiet, friendly environment. And thank you again. And Sandy, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy Eads, our president. And by the way, Daniel, you too can join the League of Women Voters and get on the NITRIS committee and be a moderator. If you like the idea of being a moderator, NITRIS, you're a woman.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thanks to the candidates for joining us. I really enjoyed the dialogue tonight. I thought there was a lot of useful exchange of ideas. I like our format. I'm a little biased, of course. The League's efforts are all about empowering voters and defending democracy. So before the election, take a look at your ballot, which you can find on the League's homepage, www.lwbkc.org, by clicking on Vote 411. And please vote by November 3rd. Again, thanks to the candidates and to all of you for joining us in empowering voters. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank everyone.
Thanks, Anitra.